Hey, welcome to the X Podcast. You are listening in to episode. You don't need to look and see which number because we are not sure, but I am sitting here.
One something.
Yes.
Hold on. I'll tell you.
We'll tell you in just a moment.
Yeah. 153.
153. If you're listening and not watching, the soothing radio voices you hear is the other Moore, Mr. Tim Moore, and Zachary
Hello.
Brown is back at the table.
I'm here.
That'd be the sick Moore.
I'm sorry?
The Sycamore? Sycamore.
Oh, are you sick still?
Well, I mean, I'm better feeling, but I still have residual depth in my voice.
But God did a miracle. You got your voice back for Sunday.
I did, and because I had zero voice on Thursday. I talked to you on the phone.
It was bad.
I tried to talk and nothing's coming out. I mean, it was so bad.
It was a little comical.
Well, how are you, gentlemen?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well.
Very good.
Very good. Okay. All right. Yep. This week's been fun. We've had, first time that I remember, we've had kind of a little bit of a staff retreat. Got away for a couple of days. Got some vision.
Staff conference.
Staff conference.
Conference.
And
really.
anyways, we're going to dive right in today because, to be honest, it's been a heavy week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some things we want to process and, for lack of better terms, just spend some time in reaction to what's been unfolding over the last week in Israel and Palestine and the horrific attack and massacre, and just wade through all of it. Just for context, I was thinking about this earlier, and then Zach, you just brought it up. I believe it was episode 39.
Yep.
Episode 39, of course, that region, as long as any of us have been alive, has been hostile and turbulent. But the last time there was a newsworthy breakout of violence between Palestine and Israel, we did an episode on it and just really talked about the broader lens of everything Israel and Palestine and some of the historic context and even how followers of Jesus view Israel today, all the things. So that's episode 39 if you want to go back and binge that. But this is different. Hamas attacked Israel, and I think you sent I'm usually not on the news on Saturday, and you sent an article to me and him. So I know it's a big question, but first reactions when you saw it, what you felt, what went through your mind?
When I first saw it, I just remember sitting in shock, like, oh my, like, is this something else that's happening in our world? I mean, it just seems like we're just going from conflict to conflict. You have Russia and Ukraine. Now you have Israel and Palestine erupting in probably the biggest conflict since, what they say, the Yom Kippur War, like 50 years ago or something like that. And then you just start, like, bits and pieces start coming in. You're checking in throughout the day, and you just see the numbers rising in terms of dead and wounded. And then you start to see the stories come out. And, I don't want to get into all the details here. I'm sure if you've read the news or seen the news, or if you haven't, go read. I mean, just what's being done is just terrible. And I just remember sitting there thinking, like, this could change everything for that region in terms of its trajectory and where it was going and what was being done. And I just remember thinking, gosh, this is big. It's not just something little, but this is going to change everything. Yeah.
What about you?
Well, when was it that when did we first hear about it? Was it Friday night?
No, it was Saturday.
Saturday night?
No,
morning.
So the attacks,
they happened overnight Saturday in Israel.
Yes, but then,
which would be Friday night here.
But then really the world started to become aware of it Saturday morning.
Yeah. So when you had sent that to me, and it really hit home just because my wife's parents were over there.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And so we kind of texted them immediately, like, I think almost within when you sent that to me and I'm talking to her about it, I think we heard from her parents. Like, it was almost the exact same time.
Like, this is going on.
Yeah, they're like, you guys heard what's going on? Yeah, we have. And so that was kind of crazy. And they're telling us they were at Ashdod at the time when they first reached out to us. So it would have been Saturday. And Ashdod was, I think it's maybe 20 miles north of Gaza. it's crazy because the day before that, so the day before the attacks happened Friday, they were in Ashkelon, which is right by Gaza, just north of it a little bit, and it was one of the first towns that got, like, major kind of towns or cities that got attacked by Hamas when they broke through the barriers there. And so, we're just very grateful because they were literally in that town. They went to a church to visit with a church that was in Ashkelon.
It's crazy.
Met with the pastor and some of the ones that were there. They were just doing things with that church. And literally they left and went to Ashdod just a little bit further up, and stayed in a hotel that night. And so, we're literally looking at scenes on the news of things on fire in Ashkelon, all that, and they're like, we were just there literally hours before this happened.
That's
so
nuts.
and to see that the amount of people that they not only came and brutally murdered, but also were taken hostage, you can imagine any American they get their hands on, they're going to take hostage. And so I think we were very grateful that they missed that. And at the same time, they're sending us videos, like, they're air sirens are going off. I think I sent them to you guys. You can see helicopters flying over. You can see lights going through the air. It's like, I think that's the dome happening, and like rockets are going up to neutralize. I mean, like, it's just pretty insane. So they're it's going to be wild to kind of hear their story firsthand of being there. And we're really grateful that they were able to get out. They spent the night there, and Sunday morning they went to, they were able to, luckily they had a friend who, they were with some pastors that were Russian pastors of church that they helped plant years and years ago, helped start. And they had a friend who is a Russian friend who is a travel agent, and was able to get them flights to Turkey, Istanbul, because you couldn't get flights anywhere. No. I mean, they were all booked up. And the U.S. stopped all flights in and out of Tel Aviv. So the only way you're getting out was to fly to a neighboring country or nation and then fly
out.
And so, we were grateful and relieved that they were able to get on a flight and get to Turkey. And so I think my first reaction was kind of like, oh, they're there. And we had some other people from our, another person from our church community. So I'm just like, are they okay? Going to be okay.
Yeah.
And then after that, I think once we knew they were, I think just in the news reports came in, for some reason, because I remember we did this conversation and we talked about it, 2 years ago. This just felt different, in so many ways. That conflict is not new. I mean, you go back to 2007, 2008, they had major conflict that created the barricades and all that stuff. This just felt different.
Yeah.
And it was just brutal. And then as more and more reports came out of just the brutality of what they were doing, this was not a group of people. It didn't seem like a group of people. I couldn't tell what their goal is. That's what I'm still a little bit confused by the tactics. I think a group like Hamas, they have to know that they are outsized, outmanned, outgunned, out everything by Israel. So I just like trying to go, what is the end goal? And so then my mind starts just going into all kinds of like geopolitical connections, and it's like Iran and is this starting a war? Is this, and I really did think, I was like, this could absolutely become World War III. This 100% could lead the U.S. to sending carrier down and weapons. And I'm like, if Iran jumps into this, or who knows what Egypt will do in this, like, I'm like, this is going to turn out to be something big.
Yeah, I think. Just on that note, I think, and maybe this will kind of launch us into like how this is different. I'll tell you, for me, the processing came in waves. So you sent the article, and I didn't click on it yet. I sometimes I break it, but I have kind of a strict rule that, like, on my quote unquote soul day, I usually try to stay off social media, YouTube, and news. But I clicked on it enough to see the headline, which was President Benjamin Netanyahu says we are at war, and I was like, oh, holy crap. But to be honest, it still didn't set in. Yeah. And this, maybe as I unpack this, show you how kind of I processed, is I got a text from Tucker that night, and he said, hey, should we post? Talking about, Israel and Palestine. And since I didn't know any of the details yet, I said, hey, let's hold off. One, I wanted to know some of the details. And number two, to be honest, my mind went back to, again, episode 39, what we unpacked last time, which is, and again, we won't get into a ton of it right now, but Hamas aside, I feel like at times Israel and Palestine becomes a very polarizing issue where people don't see a lot of the nuance and humanity on both sides.
Right.
Let's just be honest. People on the far left tend to kind of romanticize Palestine, and some of it is from a noble place of wanting to empathize with what they see as the marginalized, the oppressed, the victimized. And then, in my view, again, not to get all controversial, but in somewhat of, I think, a misunderstanding and an exaggerated interpretation of how God views the children of Israel in modern-day government, the nation of Israel. I think sometimes Christians tend to just give a blank slate to defend, justify whatever the government and military of the modern nation of Israel does. And sometimes it's just, I stand with Palestine or I stand with Israel. And so when we did our podcast, I think it was a couple of years ago, we kind of our motto was we stand with humanity.
Yeah.
Like we stand with people on both sides that are victimized and empathized, and Jesus died for them all. And so that's kind of where my mind was. And that is how my mind still views the broader conversation. But then as the details unfold and you realize, oh, there is no distinction. There's no similarity in comparison of the struggle of the Jews and the Palestinians in comparison with what Hamas did as, let's just be honest, an ISIS-style, savage, brutal mass murder, mass rape, things that we probably won't repeat on this podcast of what they've done to women, to babies, to the elderly. And so whereas my posture then was more of like a frustration of how people just didn't see any nuance, didn't take into consideration any context, didn't have any empathy for both sides. My frustration now, the more the details have emerged, is this frustration of people creating false equivalencies and not having the nerve to call evil evil. And it's created some interesting dialogue, I think, in our country. It's really interesting because, regardless of how you feel about him, President Biden, a lot of people have come out and said that he's actually made some of the strongest condemning remarks against terrorism of any country, of any president since the 90s. That's a strong statement. But and so it's interesting. I've watched people on both sides, even liberal reporters. I watched somebody on MSNBC, which I don't watch MSNBC, but I thought this was interesting. There was somebody on there that was being interviewed, and he called out MSNBC, and in the middle of the interview, basically called out one of the MSNBC hosts and said, "I don't know who is giving you guys the scripts, but it sounds like it's Hamas."
Oh, wow.
And he looked into the camera and he said, "I just want to be really direct. This is a terrorist organization. And they are murdering innocent civilians, and there is no subtle justification for what's happening." But then you flip on the news and you see in New York, there's like pro-Hamas rallies. I was reading a statement this morning by
pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine.
No, but it broke into championing what happened, and because there was the Israeli ambassador or somebody in New York, one of the Jewish leaders. Well, I was reading a statement by him this morning where he just said he just cried, could not believe his ears and eyes at watching a protest in New York of people cheering what happened.
There have been, I've heard of, I think here in Columbus, almost every major city, there's been like rallies for like, oh, we support Israel, we support Palestine, we support, you know what I mean? I've not heard much of pro-Hamas, but
I've not heard that.
But it does. I don't know that I'd be surprised. I think
well,
it just seems like people have naturally just either because of, I don't know, maybe ties, maybe narratives, maybe whatever, have just kind of fallen into a camp, and it's almost like you said, like I don't, as much as I have an affinity for Israel. I mentioned this back in episode 39. I have an affinity from Israel from my faith context because I spent so much of my life reading the Bible, and it's the story of the Old Testament is really the story of Israel, and it was God choosing them to eventually bring Jesus as the fulfillment of that. So there's that natural kind of spiritual affinity, but then there's also the fact that I'm Jewish. It's funny because my my wife's mom was over there. She's over there in Israel. She texted me at one point, and I knew this because when I went on my trip in 2018 to Israel, and she said, "Hey, did you know that you could get Israeli citizenship if you want because your mom's Jewish?" And I knew that when I was over there.
Yeah.
They actually make it. It's not that difficult if you can just show that like your mom is Jewish, which would not be hard for me to prove. Then you can claim and get Israeli citizenship.
And on the flip
And then I'm like, yeah, and I also would have to sign up and go to the army
To
for
the war.
2 years, and I'm too old to be doing that kind of stuff, let alone don't want to do it.
And also, and the other
Yep.
thing is, not just from a spiritual standpoint, you and I have been to Israel.
Yeah.
And when you walk the streets and you meet the people, there's something that gets in you.
Oh, absolutely.
And on the flip side of what you say, and I'm sure you know this, but it's interesting, like if you're an American-born Jew, there's a program, I think it still exists, where they will
Yes.
fly you over and you can come stay in Israel for, is it a year, 2 years, and they'll like pay for your time
that's
there.
cool.
At one
That's
point,
interesting.
they were. This was, I think this was like 2 decades ago or something. At one point, they were offering for any Americans that are Jewish Americans or whatever, they wanted to come back and get citizenship. They would give you property.
Yeah.
They were giving you land.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
So,
It's interesting.
you know, and so
Well-
they wanted people to move back to Israel.
What I was going to say was, I've seen the rallies in support of pro-Palestinian movement or whatever. I've not seen so much the pro-Hamas, but there is, you were talking about some of the narrative or whatever being lost. There's some sort of joining of like Hamas as somehow pro-Palestinian freedom fighters, and that's, I think, where some of that is putting it. But at the same time,
Maybe not interrupt you. Maybe what I mean more is what people are saying is in a lot of those rallies, the line gets easily blurred
yes.
because they're having these rallies in the wake of a Hamas terrorist attack.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And like you said, the blurring of they're freedom fighters.
Correct. Yes, I think that's where it's coming from. I was just reading another article before we came on this podcast, talking about how around the world, the Eiffel Tower, in New York City, Sydney, Australia, the Opera House, places lit up in the blue and white of the Israeli flag. So they also say that right now across the world, there is a united
yeah.
show of support
Yeah.
Yes,
for Israel that we probably have not seen globally
it's true.
in some time.
It's true.
And I think it's going to be interesting to see what Israel does with the moment
Yes.
right now in terms of what happens next in the conflict.
Yeah, I sent you guys a text, and again, we always know we're in dangerous territory when we talk about Israel because there's so many passionate things on each side. But number one, to your point, not only is there so much global support, which I think is such a great thing, on a humanitarian side, on just a human side, the unfortunate thing is what Hamas has done and that blurring of lines is actually hurting support for legitimate frustrations and pains that the Palestinian people may feel.
Right.
Let's just be when we talk about Palestine and Israel, this is where we just have to be honest. Like neither side is perfect, and there are grievances on both sides. It is a tragic, broken, and very complicated situation. All you have to do is look at the history of it, and that's the thing about war. There's all the innocent, everyday people caught up in the middle of this, and unfortunately, I think you have a lot of people that are very oppressed. That what is happening in this moment is actually delegitimizing any valid points they have.
Yeah. I want to come back to that. But before I do, did y'all see what Putin said today?
No.
I can only imagine.
I can't imagine.
Putin came out today and he was addressing like Russian parliament or whatever. And he was like, as a nation, Russia says that Israel and Palestine need to be careful not to kill innocent civilians.
Well, that's the pot calling the kettle black.
I don't.
Okay.
How do you intelligently respond to that?
You can't. I've got to say, again, what I was saying before, this is, I don't know, going a little bit of a trail. I'm not at all like a conspiratorial person. Like I really laugh at most conspiracy theories. Like I just don't go down that road very much. And yeah, when I look at even this kind of, I don't know, this surprising attack, it's like Hamas came in, they fooled everybody with intelligence, which was a new thing, and including U.S. intelligence. And the surprise attack and they come through not with rockets, but just also with ground and all this. And they get so far into towns, get beat back pretty quickly. I mean, Israel's secured everything along the Gaza Strip already. I mean, it didn't take long for Israel to do it. Like I don't know. I just keep going back and go, what is the end game? Like why do this now? There's been tension for years, 2 years since the last one. Why do this now? And I just keep going like, and so there's all kinds of theories out there. There's, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Israel were in talks. Biden administration is a part of in talks of some type of agreements that would potentially hurt Iran and or Palestine.
I think the language I read was talking about normalizing Israeli and in particular Saudi Arabia, but Arab relations.
Yes.
So that it's normal that, hey, we're going to exist and coexist, and there's going to be trade and normal relations back and forth between us. That was kind of the goal.
And so then you hear that, but Iran would be one that would potentially be hurt from that because it could affect shipping for Iran, for Gaza, for a lot. So then you start going.
I think they were talking about building on that note, a network, like a railroad and transportation stuff from Egypt through Israel to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
That would connect all three.
So then you start to go, okay, it was Iran who has a history of supporting both financially and other things, Hamas and the other organizations. You got in Lebanon what's going on. You got attacks coming over from Hezbollah to northern part of Israel. So now they're getting on both fronts in Israel, and so then I follow the breadcrumb to Russia because Russia and Iran have a connection and have had one for a very long time. And then you go, man, wouldn't this benefit Russia for us to have to divert all of, which I told you that. And then there was an article that came out after, like I was like, for us to divert all of our help from Ukraine over to Israel, does that not help Russia? So I start putting on them like, because I'm just like, if you're a small, even terrorist organization like this, like what is your goal? Because now Israel's going because they control most of the infrastructure to Gaza. So now they're wiping out all the infrastructure to take them out. It's hurting all of the people, the citizens in Palestine that don't want, want this.
But
and
I think
I don't know. I don't know if maybe I can't get in the head of Hamas. That's hard to do.
But I mean, don't overthink it, right? Like I think I also sent you both another article that said, hey, when Hamas tells you who they are, like you need to believe them. And it literally broke down the Hamas charter, which originated in 1988, and then it was changed slightly in 2017. But basically, in summary, the article had 4 main points. But Hamas, their whole existence is predicated upon the destruction of Israel. That's why they exist.
Yeah, but this is not going to destroy Israel.
But it's a symbol. It's a fight. See,
this is where I think you and I disagree a little bit because I think
you think it will?
Well, no. Because you said you feel like almost all this is geopolitical.
Yeah, I don't think it's as much a holy war
to
as
Zach's
I do.
point, I think
it's an unholy
they have an
war.
ideological standpoint.
Yes.
Or in-game. Ideological in-game. And even if they don't think it's going to work, I mean, think about it. Like, think about a lot of the suicide bombers. It's like, was that efficient? But their ideological goal is to either have victory or be a martyr. So either, and you get desperate enough, and I mean, let's be honest, this fight, at least this land fight, has been going on for 100 years in this way, almost. Like, at some point, you're going to get desperate, and you're just going to go for it.
You think that's what happened?
I think it's.
I'm just like, what caused this to go now? Usually, there's something, and the excuses that they gave did not seem to equate.
I just think there's an ideological. I think there's an ideological end game, and then you have strategic timing. This was a 50-year anniversary of the latest big attack. This is on a Jewish holiday.
It was a big Jewish holiday.
There's going to be festival goers. It's going to be an easy target. I absolutely believe Iran helped mastermind this behind the scenes.
Hey, now wait a minute. U.S. intelligence said they don't have.
Well, U.S. intelligence didn't even know it was going to happen.
No.
And you finish because you're talking about because I think what you said is very important to understand because it's very similar to Iran's charter.
Well, so it's their charter states we're going to go for the destruction of Israel. And the way that we're going to do that is through a jihad, through a holy war. And then there in Hamas's charter, there's no room for accepting any sort of compromise, negotiation. I think was been the U.S. policy towards the whole situation for a long time. I mean, go back to, was it the Oslo Accords, and Clinton tried to have Yasser Arafat come, and was the creation of a two-state system where you have a Palestine state. Hamas will not accept that. They won't even consider. They'll reject any sort of treaty or compromise outright. The article said without even looking at it, because it's compromising and allowing Israel to exist. So there's something
religiously, that land is part of their holy value.
Correct.
And for anybody to be on it and for them tonight fight for it and kill those that are on it is against the values of their own religion.
Correct.
Yeah, to an extent. What I would say as well is that the thing that you hear too from a lot of Muslims around the world is that Hamas does not represent their religion. That's where there's, I think, some blurred lines between what, and again, it's probably they take their religion, and then there's people who take it to the extreme, just like there are in a lot of different ones.
Absolutely.
And that's what you find with Hamas. This is a very it's an extreme terrorist version of this.
Yeah. Whenever we talk about that, I'm conflicted because I think I want to be careful here. Obviously, I'm biased. I follow Jesus, and there's a reason I follow Jesus. And if you want to call it, quote unquote, religion, I would call it a movement or relationship. But when you compare the origins and the leaders of the way of Jesus with Islam, they're diametrically opposed. Jesus said, he who lives by the sword will die by the sword. The whole movement of the way of Jesus was spread through nonviolence and peace and generosity and kindness. The origin and spread of Islam was the opposite. Yeah. Having said that, to your point, especially, I mean, this is fresh. I've felt this way for a long time, but especially fresh coming back from Egypt and spending a week with some of the most wonderful people on the planet. To your point, yes, this is so important for people to understand. The vast majority of Muslims in the world are wonderful, peace-loving people who would say that does not represent me at all. That does not represent my way of life. It's fascinating. Speaking of Egypt, this says, and I'm sure you guys know this is already filtered over into Egypt.
Oh, yeah. Well, they have blockades not letting people from, and they have for a long time.
The crossing between Gaza
there's not been
and
crossing.
Egypt.
Well, not just that, though. So I think I told you, when I was in Egypt, it's funny, I Googled, terrorist threat. And the one place we weren't allowed to go, or actually, I don't know how I got this, but I Googled, is Egypt safe? And it said, reconsider travel. And the main reason was because of the Sinai Peninsula, which that's the whole history of how that even got shifted over is interesting. But the northern part of the Sinai Peninsula is where you still have parts of ISIS and Islamic terrorists. And so I thought that was interesting. Well, then somebody that's close to me, she's about to go to Egypt in 2 weeks, and she texted me yesterday and she said, "Hey, it looks like the trip might be on hold."
Yeah,
because Alexandria, where the first church in Egypt was birthed, there was just an attack there, and I had read 2 days before she texted me that a tour guide and the two people that were with him on the tour were killed just 3 days ago in Egypt on the Sinai Peninsula. So the violence has already spread, and there's already, I think, been an emboldening of extremists already in Egypt.
Yeah, I would not travel to that area.
I didn't know this, but Hamas actually came from the Egyptian Islamic Brotherhood. That was the roots of where Hamas came from, was actually from Egypt. So,
and they have the same principles.
Yep.
I think what's it's interesting that whenever people, if you remove the most recent violent and atrocious acts that have been taking place, that really they affect you emotionally when you so that you naturally go, oh God, it just kind of solidifies. Okay, I'm pro-Israel, like you said, or around the world. When you just step back a little bit, try to remove any of that, and look at the history, it's funny to me because whichever side people try to argue for and support, usually is determined by how far they'll go back in history.
True.
So the people that are pro-Palestine they're going back to World War II, where the world felt terrible for the Jews with the Holocaust and said, "Oh, well, hold on, you need to give your own nation and your land." and many of the Palestinians who generations grew up in
Living
where
in that
is
land.
now Israel,
Yeah.
were basically kicked out or said, hey, these, and so for them, I think the anger and we're talking for 60, 70 years is going on, is just feeling like we just got kicked out of our own country,
Yeah.
our own land. That's
Yeah.
I think some of that, on top of the ideological conflict, is behind a lot of this. And so you get people who support them, and they're like, just look what happened in 1947, 48, and then there's other people go in and go, well, this goes back a lot further than that.
Yeah.
And so, you got the people of Israel and Christians who would say, well, I read the Bible and God gave Abraham this land, and they had to go take it by force.
Yeah.
And they did. And
It's-
so this is their land. And so this has been a 2,000+ year battle over this land, more than 2,000 years,
It's
3,000 years.
kind of, to frame the template I shared at the beginning, I think there's appropriate times to have the larger conversation and bring in the context, while also realizing that there's an inappropriate time to create false equivalencies
Yes.
and not call evil evil.
Yes.
But in the context of the larger conversation, to your point, I don't know why, the thought that came to me in my mind, I think you told me the first year you met me that my mind works in threes. The thought that came to me driving here was one of the many reasons that this complex issue is it just feels like no one can untether it and resolve it,
Yeah.
is because it's ancient, historic, and modern. So this goes back. We could go back all the way back to,
Ishmael and
Ishmael
Isaac.
Yep.
Isaac, and this is the roots of this are millennia long and religious, and it's just so deep. But then again, not to spend a whole lot of time there, but historically, we really, when we're talking about the land from a modern history standpoint, we think about it's 100 years. Right? It's like 100 years ago. It's the Ottoman Empire. And it really is a bunch of diverse religions around there. But about that time, in that eastern part of the Mediterranean, in Palestine, Israel, the ethnic Arabs begin getting this distinct nationality, this distinct feeling of their own people groups, the Palestinians. And then at the same time, the Jews, that's when this whole idea of Zionism, of, hey, we're not just a religion, but we need to have our own nationality, our own land.
Yeah.
So tens of thousands of Jews start coming over. And so you have all that. But then in the 30s, you have the British Empire. And for a while, they let the Jews in. But then there's this tension begins to grow between now the Palestinians and the Jews. We'll enter World War I and then World War II. Well, then the UN comes in and says, all right, well, the Jews, and you can relate to this if you're a Jew, you're like, okay, you have all these other Muslim Arab lands. The Jews don't have their own land. Yep. We're going to create a place, this two-state thing where we have Israel and Palestine. Well, maybe understandably, a lot of Arabs and Muslims feel like, well, this is just another version of European colonialism.
Yeah.
And we also think that land's holy. We also think that land's ours. And then, and this is where we just got to be honest, especially if we say, hey, we support Israel, if we're on that side, we just got to be honest. Like, after the
British Charter.
After the British Charter and after the UN and after all that, slowly, bit by bit, Israel has been pushing out their borders, expanding their land, expelling Palestinians. You have the Arab Spring War, which after that, Israel expelled thousands of Palestinians. That took the Golan Heights, took part of Gaza, and then you have another war.
Yom Kippur.
Yeah. And so through all that, and I just think it's important for us, if we're going to consider the broader context, outside of the terrorist, which there's no, if you find yourself even subtly justifying anything that's happened this past week, you need to step out of the conversation, because that's a tone deaf and unreasonable, and in my mind, horrible road to go down. But in the broader conversation, I just think it's important to realize, like, you look at it, and innocent people, Palestinians didn't ask to be born there. They're in a place where I think they say it's the most densely populated place on Earth. Right?
Yeah, there's
2 million people within, like,
it's about double the size of Washington D.C.
Yeah,
and it's not very big
within the small area, and most in extreme poverty. desperate situation. Their land's been siphoned off more and more and more throughout the decades, and they feel controlled. And Israel would say, hey, here's justifiably why we react so strongly. They have a history of trauma and Holocaust and terrorism and being attacked by all the enemies of the world. So they have their own reason. I mean, I've heard it when I've been to Israel. They have their own psyche and psychological way they process their response to the rest of the world. But then if you're just a Palestinian trying to make a living, you got your own. And I just think it's so important. And even speaking in context, then again, if you're a Jew, because they said this is their 9/11.
Yeah.
When you look at the population of Jew, I saw a stat this morning that said what happened on like day one of this slaughter by Hamas would be equivalent to 44,000 Americans being killed in a single day.
Yeah.
I mean, that is their 9/11.
Yeah.
And I just think, all of that's so important to when we try to make this simplistic. What's simple and what is clear is the evil that's happened this past week. What's not simplistic is the broader conversation of
solutions.
Okay, how do we move forward? Take Hamas aside.
Yeah.
Hamas needs to end. But Palestinians and Jews, the normal people just trying to live life.
I have a
How do
feeling
you move
Israel's
forward?
going to
And
make
Hamas.
sure that Hamas ends by the time they're done, which I don't think you can ever stamp that out completely. They'll escape out. It lives everywhere. But I think we all feel that
All the reports are
Benjamin
that they're
Netanyahu's like, no, we're going to finish this. We're done.
Well, it also is coming at a time where I don't know how much you guys have been following what's been happening, but the Israeli government itself has been kind of having its own crisis identity with I can't say his last name, Benjamin Netanyahu. They've been kind of leaning more. Yeah, I can't say it.
Netanyahu. I can't say it now.
Benjamin Netanyahu.
Netanyahu. Anyways, they've been going more conservative.
Yahoo.
There's a lot of questions about how this could even happen in Israel. And so all eyes are on him, and I think he's looking to make a statement with his response towards this.
I think it's like, if you imagine like a Pearl Harbor type thing happening or a 9/11 thing happening again, as divided as we are, we would probably come together real fast.
That's probably
and that's what's happening.
Yes.
Yeah.
That happens every time there is,
And
it's like,
but I've seen
it's like
some-
when the person on the across the aisle politically is your enemy,
Yeah.
and then you actually have a real enemy from outside come in, they become your friend.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think you're probably seeing that with Israel.
I've seen some extremism though, like I think they're the equivalent of like their chief of staff, so like their defense secretary said that they need to hold like nothing back, use like their Jericho missile systems, like use their nukes, like I mean they need to do everything they can do to take out.
I think that's the sad reality, and the thing that does war is just really ugly.
Yeah.
And it's never neat, clean, like you were saying. It's like before in your text, and it's like, that.
Well, it feels like they're being indiscriminate right now. Israel's response.
It feels like it.
It's
I think it's harder than we imagine to be discriminate in war.
Because you have tunnels and terrorists that are embedded in the society.
They did that before, like 2 years ago. They were hiding out and launching rockets from schools where they have kids and people.
But it's almost like I
what
want
I've
to say,
seen-
like Israel, don't like become them, which they're never going to become them.
But to that point, I saw some reporting today that said like the IDF, Israeli Defense Force, and other ones, they're sending messages right now.
They've been telling them for a
to
while.
Gaza,
Yes. But
like to the civilians, and
Yes.
saying whatever you can do, get away from like known Hamas places, like where they are. Like
I think they're trying. I just think we've seen this as well with Russia and Ukraine. And I think Russia doesn't care as much about obviously impacting civilians in there, but I think it's really hard, even when Ukraine has been able to respond and trying to lob missiles back over at Russia and certain things. There's still civilian casualties.
Yeah.
It's a
It's
casualty
gonna
of war.
happen.
It's and so I do think that Israel has tried with that. I've also seen that they've tried to say for recently too. if you're in Palestine and you can get out through Egypt because they won't let them into Israel. That's a whole other issue. But
they just actually destroyed, the Israeli Air Force destroyed the last bridge, I think, between Gaza Strip and
Egypt.
Yes,
I think
so. There's no way for them to get out.
They attacked it. There is talk, though. Again, I don't know if this was before that or after that, with Egypt, I think, of trying to create a humanitarian corridor for people to get out with the right kind of papers and other things. But, there's so much risk in that. I'm just saying there's risk in that whenever you have any of that. That you get Hamas military slipping out into that, which, So it's just way more complicated. I think that they are trying because of all of those things, but I also think that they're not holding back on if they think there's a site or they or have their intel says, no, this is where Hamas, this is where tunnels are, this is where they launch stuff. They're firing at.
Do you think Israel's going to stay in Gaza, though?
Yes.
You think they're going to go?
I think they're going to infiltrate.
I think the whole map's going to change off
this. They're going to stay.
I think they're going to infiltrate 100%. I don't think they're going to go in and just try and take out Hamas and then leave. I do not think. Just because of when I just try to get into the psychology of the peoples that we're talking about in Israel and Palestine, I think they're like, we are going to continue dealing. We had it in 2007, 8. We dealt with it Yom Kippur. I think this is going to embolden them to say, and I think they're going to go door to door, which is what they had to do in 2007, 8. I was watching an interview with a guy he's here in America who was in the military then, and had to do a lot of that because he was talking about what it's like doing the door-to-door type, and he says it's very dangerous. But you're basically going door-to-door, clearing every single house looking for Hamas. And so you imagine you're probably using Palestinians as shields. He said there are booby traps everywhere. He said you're just hoping to not get abducted. Because it's bad if you get abducted. You know what I mean? But
do you think they'll do the same thing in West Bank?
I don't think so. I think their bigger issue is Lebanon. I think I don't think West Bank. There's almost nothing West Bank. There's almost nothing there. There's not much of a military force. I've driven, our tour. We went through West Bank. It's mostly desert and whatever else area.
That's still a semi-dangerous area. I'm surprised y'all went near West Bank.
Yeah, we did. We drove through West Bank. But Hezbollah, they just moved 10,000 troops, and they called up, all reserves, anybody. They just called them all up, and they're just sending a troop force up to secure the northern border.
I read there's 2 things that came out just today, right before we came on, that IDF said that there was reporting of either Lebanese or Hezbollah aircraft in Israeli territory. And also hospitals are being prepped in the north for casualties and different things like that.
See, it would actually make more sense to me that a second wave of attack happens from the north in Hezbollah. But this is where I go back and I keep thinking.
Not when they dug in. I mean, they're doing a few things now.
That's where it makes me wonder if there's more coordinated than we think.
But see, here's where your conspiracy theory would be. I would struggle with, because you forget there's also this for the U.S. uncomfortably close relationship between Russia and Israel.
Is there?
I don't think there's that close of a relationship between Russia and Israel.
That's kind of a surprise to me.
I watched because I read reports even just a few months ago where the U.S. they've had tense conversations. I mean, Lydia fact-checked me on this, but I remember reading there was tense conversations even between President Biden and Netanyahu, because I don't think.
Well, that's part of some of the stuff that's been happening in Israel. They've elected the most far-right, conservative, almost it would be populist government movement in Israel history, and it would not surprise me that Russia's trying to buddy up to that.
Well,
kind of government.
I don't think Israel.
So we'll say this. Just the first thing I pulled up said that when Netanyahu became the prime minister, Israel maintained its relations with the Kremlin, refused to impose sanctions against Russia, and declined to send defensive weaponry to Ukraine. So we'll say at least that place, that site I pulled up. Yeah. So there's definitely some type of
that's what I mean. Yeah. There's I don't think they ever came out with a really strong
No.
rebuke towards
No.
Russia's invasion or anything. They refused to even get involved. Speaking of far right presidents, okay, both of y'all probably saw this. I'm going towards
Was this the
Netanyahu
response?
or
No.
the Nayib Bukele.
No. I saw something that was Biden's comments versus Trump's comments.
Oh, we won't even this.
on
Yeah.
that.
But so one of the people we always talk about that inspires us a lot, Erwin McManus, he just yesterday got to go to his homeland, the place of his birth,
I saw
to
that.
El Salvador, meet with the president.
Saw that. That's cool.
And just beautiful moment. But his son reposted a post by President Nayib Bukele of El Salvador, and I just thought this was fascinating. I just wanted to read this. He said, this is the president of El Salvador. As a Salvadoran with Palestinian ancestry, I'm sure the best thing that could happen to the Palestinian people is for Hamas to completely disappear. Those savage beasts do not represent the Palestinians. Anyone who supports the Palestinian cause would make a great mistake siding with those criminals. It would be like if Salvadorans would have sided with MS-13 terrorists just because we share ancestors or nationality. The best thing that happened to us as a nation was to get rid of those rapists and murderers and let the good people thrive.
Yeah.
And the Palestinians
That's
should do
good.
the same.
Wow.
It's good.
Well said.
Very well said.
I think one of the last things I'll just say, and we probably could wrap this up, but I think one of the things that I've been challenged with, just when I think about is like, how do I pray for even this? Because I feel like I can't do anything in this, but I want to, pray.
Yeah.
And I was this morning, I pray for the safe return for the people that are there. I want to pray for a peaceful resolution. I don't know that there will be one.
Yeah.
But it's really hard when you look at a situation like this and you have a lot of emotions and feelings that come in. But then I also still try to remember that, as much as, you see the reports of what Hamas is doing, I also still, for some reason, I just always have in the back of my mind, I just can imagine Jesus also saying things like, hey, pray for your enemies.
Yep.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't want to pray for my enemies. I want God smite these enemies, is what you kind of naturally, because your emotions. And so I think it's
good.
important to remember to have a perspective where it's like, I can care deeply for what's happening in Israel and even feel like I want to support Israel in the way this attack is going on and pray for the people of Israel. And like I said, my wife's parents are there. I've been there. You've been there. You meet people from there. You you have a deep connection or an affinity, especially because of my faith with Israel. And so every part of me just wants to almost take a side, where, again, I want to go back to at the end of the day, I want to make sure that I'm not only praying for Israel, praying for the safe return of those that are abducted, I was just praying for peace. I can imagine, I was reading some stories of a guy who was, there was a guy, this was near Ashkelon or one of those places that he was on the other side of Israel visiting his mom, something else, whatever, when he is literally getting updates and reports on Saturday when it's happening to the neighbors or people telling him that his wife and two daughters, they're 3 and 2 or 4 or something like that, were abducted and taken. And I just cannot imagine as a father and has had daughters, I think that's the thing. I just really try to, that's empathy. I really try to sit in that and go, gosh, I just feel so bad to hear that story. And so I want to pray for that, but also think about the situation the Palestinians are in that don't want this.
Yeah.
Like that president said, that don't want Hamas, but they don't have any control because it is the most powerful group running
The country.
it. And there's been already 2,000 plus people killed between both sides, more than that, 2,300 last I heard, 1,200 some in Israel, and 1,000 in Palestine, and it's, I'm sure, going up every minute.
Yeah, I
And
found
so
myself.
I'm just really trying to process, how do I pray for this situation?
This morning I realized I'd said some prayers, but I realized I was like, I've stewed more on this and consumed more news on this and been frustrated about this more than I've actually prayed. So this morning, honestly, is I think the first time I actually took some time to pray, you, for the hostages, for the families who've already lost, for some sort of, as impossible as it sounds, de-escalation and resolution for Israel and Palestine, for those people. But then, yes, it's funny you said that. I thought about, and I mean, I know you can only take the comparison so far, but I thought about the terrorist Saul who became Paul and thought to myself, God, I don't ever get to the point where I don't think that you specialize in taking the worst of the worst and doing
Turn
something.
them around, yeah.
And so I started praying peace for Israel, peace for Palestine, and repentance and revival to hit the worst.
I found myself wanting to pray for peace and justice.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah,
like, you know,
yeah.
and sometimes you just feel like there's like, are these at odds with each other? It's like, okay, I think in an earthly world, I want there to be justice when I see
Yes.
about those atrocities. I'm like, you know,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I really do, just for the sake of all the military.
I think it's okay to pray for both.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I just want peace to be in that. I don't know what that looks like. There has been peaceful resolutions before. There was 2
Yeah.
years ago in conflict that it didn't solve anything, but it stopped,
But it stopped the fight.
the immediate fight
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
atrocities happening. So I just thought maybe too, I know we don't normally do this, just even as we end this, I thought it'd be okay. Maybe we just take a moment and just pray.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
a good
If you-
idea.
I'll just say, I just wanted to say a prayer. Like, I know
Yeah.
we don't normally do that on the podcast, but it just is so heavy.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think right now. And I think a lot of times, you know, it's just everything today in social media in the U.S. is all just about putting out some kind of post. And I don't know. I'm kind of over that.
Yeah.
Like, I understand there's the idea of talking about it. That's why we didn't put a post out, but I said something and we prayed about it as a church on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And, you know,
now we are.
We're talking about it here. And I did put out a post just to call people to prayer, because if there's anything I can do on this side is I can ask a God that I believe in, who is the God, whether or not they receive it or not, of both the Jews and the Arabs,
Yeah.
of the Palestinians and the people of Israel, to intervene. And so let's just, if we can, we're just going to take a moment. Let me just pray for us and for this situation. Father, we come to you just with heavy hearts over the things that we've heard and seen happening over in Israel. God, we pray it's some way, God, for a de-escalation to happen in the Middle
Yes,
East,
God.
Lord. Just pray for peace. And God, at the same time, there's a part of me that wants justice as well for the people that have been brutally attacked. And so, God, it's a complicated situation to us. It's probably not that complicated to you. And God, we just pray. We pray for the hostages that are right now just experiencing terror. God, I pray for a change of heart for the captors, the ones who have them, the ones that are holding them. I just pray, God, you would release them. I just pray, God, even if there's a way, Father, to go in and get them, but to return them to their families. God, I pray for those who have already lost family members that have been attacked and just brutalized. I just pray, God, my heart grieves with them. We grieve with them. We mourn with them. God, I pray that you would comfort them in this time the only way that you can. I pray, God, that you would help not like more hatred and bitterness to root in their hearts, but God, that they would find a way to even forgive and be able to heal. Lord, I just think this is a massive national conflict. That the roots run deep, but at the heart of it, God, there is just sin in humanity and a brokenness in humanity. And so, God, we ask for your intervention in this situation. I pray for the Palestinian citizens that are in harm's way, the Israeli citizens in our harm's way, the conflict in the north part of Israel. God, we ask for you to do something. We ask for you to step in. God, we need you to show up in this moment. And we pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. A little heavy, but
Yeah.
it's a heavy situation going on in our world.
It
And
is.
I think we just wanted to. I think part of what we wanted to do at this table is what we kind of use this for, is to process it, to talk
Yep.
about it. I think it's good for us to do that, but also a reminder for us. This is if you have faith, to like this is the
Yeah.
time to lean on your faith and to ask
Yep.
God to step in and do things.
Yeah.
good.
Okay.
And we've said it throughout this podcast, but just in closing, to be clear, we extend compassion in our hearts to the Israeli people being affected. We extend compassion in our hearts to the Palestinian people being affected, and we just unequivocally denounce all violence and evil and the actions of Hamas. And
Yeah.
we are praying, like you said, it's so complicated to us, not to God, and we're just praying it sounds kind of religious, say, got to let your kingdom come.
Right.
Let what would happen in heaven come down
Yeah.
and rule and heal and change what's happening here. And however this is hitting you, if you're a person of faith, we encourage you to pray.
Yeah.
Yep.
And whatever you do, whoever you're talking to, just never underestimate the power of meaningful dialogue.
Yeah.
And thinking through these things carefully and with humanity in mind. And hope you have the great rest of the week. Send us your thoughts, questions, comments, rate, review, subscribe. Until next week.
Hey, wait.
Yeah.
Can I just give a little teaser of what we want to talk about coming up?
Yes.
I just real quick.
Yeah. Go ahead.
There's so much talk of what is happening in the Middle East as the precursor or the beginning of the end times. Like there's a lot. I think it's just really heightened right now.
Yeah.
And so we thought it could be interesting if we take what's happening there now and let's talk about it in the perspective or under the broad context of end times.
End times, eschatology. Will Zach be bringing the blood moon charts?
I've got them all.
You got them
my
all.
gosh.
Okay.
So
I've been
anyways,
researching.
so I don't know that we'll do that next week. We might, but I'm just saying like it's coming soon. We're going to talk about that. So if people have any thoughts or questions on it, they can let us know.
Go ahead and let us know. Does Zach know the date of the return of Christ?
I
Because
would
he
assume
says he
not.
does.
Wow.
To be revealed.
To be
To be revealed. All right.
All right.
Let's do
Until next week, we will see you then.